I still remember the day as if it were yesterday. The sun had just begun to rise, its pale light spilling through the window, painting soft lines across the floor. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. I could hear the ticking of the old wall clock and the faint whistle of the kettle on the stove. I had made tea like I always did, 1 cup for me and 1 for him. It had become a habit even though he no longer lived with me. I still made 2 cups, 1 for the memory of a time when mornings were filled with his voice, his laughter, and the sound of his shoes running down the hallway because he was always late for school. That morning, I had come to visit him, or rather, I had convinced myself it was just a casual drop-in. Mothers always find reasons, small excuses, just to see their children. I carried a small box of homemade sweets with me. He used to love them when he was young, especially the coconut ladus. He'd steal them while they were still warm and I'd pretend not to notice. When I reached his home, I hesitated at the gate. It wasn't the house I had imagined my son would live in. It was modern, elegant, quiet, almost too quiet for him. I stood there for a few minutes, clutching the box, rehearsing what I'd say when he opened the door. Maybe I'd tease him about not visiting me lately. Maybe I'd ask how his new project was going. Or maybe I'd just say, "I missed you." When the door opened, it wasn't Daniel who stood there. It was Claire, his wife. She looked surprised. Not unhappy, just surprised. "Oh, Mrs. Patel," she said softly. "You're here," I smiled. "Yes, dear. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." That wasn't true, of course. I had taken 2 buses just to get there. But I didn't want to seem desperate. She opened the door wider, her eyes flicking over the box in my hands. "Oh, that's so nice of you." Her voice was polite, careful. Then I saw him, standing in the hallway behind her, dressed neatly, adjusting his jacket. He looked handsome, older somehow. His hair was shorter, his shoulders broader. But something in his eyes had changed. They looked distant, like they were focused on something far away. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "What are you doing here?" My heart leapt at the sound of his voice. "I thought I'd bring you some sweets," I said, holding up the box with a smile. "Your favorite." He smiled, but it was faint, almost forced. "That's sweet, Mom, but we're actually on our way out. Maybe you could have called first?" That sentence, it wasn't cruel, but it hit me harder than he could ever know. Maybe you could have called first. Once upon a time, I could walk into his room without knocking. I knew his friends, his dreams, even the things he never said out loud. And now I was supposed to call first, to make an appointment to see my own son. I forced a smile. "Oh, of course. I should have thought of that. You young people have such busy lives." He adjusted his watch, glanced at Claire, and said, "We'll visit soon, okay?" And then it happened. He stepped past me. Just walked right past me, like I was someone standing on the sidewalk, someone who didn't belong in his world anymore. He didn't meet my eyes. He didn't hug me. He just walked down the steps, his hand brushing against Claire's as they headed toward the car. I stood there, still holding the box of sweets, feeling the morning sun warm my face. But inside, everything felt cold. I told myself not to cry. I told myself it was nothing, just a small moment. But deep down, I knew something had changed forever. He drove away, and I stood there until the sound of the car disappeared. Only then did I turn and start walking home. My steps felt heavier than ever before. The people on the street passed by without noticing me. And in that moment, I understood something I had never realized, that loneliness doesn't begin when you're alone. It begins when someone you love forgets how to see you. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the look on his face, the way his voice sounded polite but distant. I thought about all the times he used to hold my hand when we crossed the road, or how he'd run to show me his report card. And I thought about how quietly time can take things away from you, one by one, until you wake up and realize you don't recognize your own life anymore. I sat by the window, looking out at the dark street. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The clock ticked softly. I whispered to myself, he didn't mean it. He's just busy. But my heart whispered back, no, he's changing. I wanted to call him that night. To say, "Daniel, do you remember how you used to make me tea when I was tired? Do you remember how we used to sit and talk until midnight?" But I didn't call. I was afraid. Afraid he'd sound distracted again. Afraid he wouldn't pick up. Instead, I sat there and waited for the sun to rise, hoping the next day would feel different. It didn't. Days turned into weeks, and the silence grew louder. I tried to fill it with small things, cleaning the house, tending the garden, rereading old letters. But nothing helped. I'd walk past his room, still the same as he'd left it, and pause at the door. The books, the trophies, the little notes he'd stuck on the wall. "Good luck, Mom," one of them said. I ran my fingers over the fading ink and smiled through the ache in my chest. When you've built your world around one person, you never expect that one day they might build theirs without you. I started to notice how people in my neighborhood would ask, "How's Daniel doing these days?" And I'd answer, "He's fine. Busy with work." But each time I said it, my voice grew smaller. I wasn't angry. I couldn't be. Mothers don't stop loving their children just because they forget to love them back the same way. Still, a small part of me, the quiet, hidden part, and kept waiting for him to call. That was the day everything began to change. It was the first time he walked past me like a stranger, and I had no idea that moment would live in my heart for years. But even as it broke me, I held on to one thing: hope. Because a mother's hope doesn't fade even when her voice does. Before everything changed, Daniel and I were inseparable. If I close my eyes, I can still see his little hands covered in flour, trying to help me knead dough in our small kitchen. He must have been 6 or 7 at the time, his hair always a mess, his laughter filling every corner of our little home. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and somehow that always felt like enough. When his father passed away, the world became smaller for the both of us. Daniel was only 10 then. I still remember how he stood silently at the funeral, holding my hand so tightly that his fingers trembled. He didn't cry that day. I think he was trying to be brave for me. That night, after everyone had gone, we sat on the floor, surrounded by quiet. He looked up at me and said, "Mom, I'll take care of you now." I smiled through my tears. "You're just a boy, Daniel." He shook his head. "No, I'm your boy." And he was, for many, many years. After his father's death, I started working longer hours at the grocery store. It wasn't easy. There were days my back hurt so much I could barely stand, but the thought of Daniel kept me going. I wanted him to have everything his father and I had once dreamed of giving him. A good education, a safe home, a chance to be free of the struggles we had faced. Every evening, I'd come home to find him waiting at the gate, school bag still on his shoulders, waving excitedly. "Mom, guess what happened today?" He'd tell me stories about the cricket match he won, the teacher who praised his handwriting, the stray puppy he wanted to bring home. I'd listen to every word, smiling at how alive he sounded. Sometimes after dinner, he'd sit beside me with his homework spread out on the table. I wasn't highly educated, but I'd try to help him the best I could. "Mom," he'd say, "you should be a teacher." I'd laugh. "And who would buy groceries for us if I did that?" He'd grin. "Then I'll earn money when I grow up and you won't have to work anymore." Those were the kinds of promises that made every hard day worth it. Daniel was a bright student. He wasn't the loudest in class, but his teachers always said he had something special, a way of understanding people, of listening deeply. That's what I loved most about him. Even as a child, he was thoughtful. When I was too tired to talk, he'd quietly sit beside me, his little hand on mine. He didn't ask for much. Maybe a bedtime story or a new pencil case once in a while. On weekends, we'd clean the house together. He'd complain, of course. "Why do we have to clean every corner, Mom?" And I'd say, "Because love lives in clean corners." He'd roll his eyes, but he'd still help. Those were the simple, golden years, when we didn't have much money, but we had time, laughter, and warmth. As he grew older, things changed slowly. Teenagers have their own worlds, friends, school, secrets. But even then, Daniel would still sit with me some evenings, sharing bits of his day. "Mom, I like this girl in my class," he'd once confessed, blushing. I teased him. "Oh, so my boy's growing up?" He groaned, hiding his face in his hands. "Mom, stop." We laughed until our sides hurt. At night, when he was asleep, I'd look at him and whisper a silent prayer, that he'd always stay this kind, this gentle no matter where life took him. When he got into university, it felt like all my sacrifices had finally meant something. I still remember the day the acceptance letter came. He ran home, waving it in the air. "Mom, I did it." I got in. I hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. I told you, didn't I? Hard work never fails. He was the first in our family to go to university. The neighbors came to congratulate him, and I felt proud, not just for him, but for the little boy who had grown up helping his mother instead of complaining about what he didn't have. The night before he left for campus, I packed his bags myself. Clothes, notebooks, a few photos, and his favorite blanket. I even slipped a small note inside one of his books. It said, "Whenever you feel lonely, remember, home is just a heartbeat away." He laughed when he found it later, but I knew it made him smile. The day he left was the hardest. I woke up early, made his favorite breakfast, and tried not to cry. As he loaded his bags into the bus, I said, "Call me when you reach." "I will, Mom," he said. "Don't worry." He hugged me quickly, embarrassed that his friends were watching. But as the bus drove off, he waved from the window until I disappeared from view. For weeks after that, the house felt empty. Every corner reminded me of him. The chair where he used to sit, the cup he drank from, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in his room. But he called often, sometimes twice a week. "Mom, how are you?" And I'd say, "I'm fine, Beta. Did you eat properly?" He'd laugh. "You always ask that." That laughter kept me company. During his college years, Daniel changed. Not in a bad way, just in the way all young people do. He started talking about new ideas, about cities he wanted to visit, about the kind of life he dreamed of. I listened to him, proud and afraid at the same time. I remember him once saying, "Mom, when I get a job, I'll buy you a small house near the sea." I smiled. "Why the sea?" "Because you've never seen it." He was right. I'd spent my whole life in one place, working, worrying, and waiting. That promise of a house by the sea became one of my favorite dreams. When he graduated, I wore the nicest sari I owned and took the long bus ride to his ceremony. I sat in the back row watching him walk across the stage in his black gown, his smile wide and bright. My heart felt like it could burst. Afterward, he found me in the crowd. "Mom," he called out, hugging me tight. "You made it." "Of course," I said, wiping a tear. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." He looked at me for a long moment and said softly, "I couldn't have done any of this without you." That day, I believed him. Daniel found a job soon after, a good one. The kind that paid enough for him to finally stand on his own 2 feet. I was proud beyond words. He started renting a small apartment in the city. I helped him move in, unpacked his kitchen things, folded his shirts, lined up his books. "Mom, I can do this," he said, laughing. "I know," I replied, handing him a jar of pickles. "But this is how mothers say goodbye." He smiled, a little embarrassed, but he took the jar anyway. After he moved out, I felt the emptiness again. But this time I told myself it was a good kind of loneliness. The kind that comes when someone you love is growing into their own life. He still called, though less often now. Sometimes he'd sound tired. "Long day at work, Mom." And I'd tell him, "Don't forget to rest." He'd always end with, "I love you, Mom." And that was enough. When he met Claire, he sounded happy. "Mom, she's wonderful," he told me. "You'll like her." I smiled. "As long as she makes you happy, I already do." I met her a few weeks later. She was polite, beautiful, confident. The kind of woman who seemed to know exactly where she was going. I could see why he admired her. That night, after they left, I sat on the couch and looked at their photo on his phone. They looked good together, young, bright, full of hope. I prayed for them, for their love, for their future. Little did I know that future would come to mean fewer phone calls, fewer visits, and a silence that would one day break my heart. Back then, though, I still believed that love could never fade between a mother and her son. I believed distance was just geography, but life has its own way of teaching lessons, softly at first, then suddenly, until you realize things aren't the same anymore. The laughter fades, the calls grow shorter. The world your child builds no longer has a space that fits you easily. And by the time you notice, it's already too late to ask when it began. When Daniel got married, I thought it would bring more love into our family, one more heart to care for him, one more smile at our table. The wedding was beautiful. I can still picture it. The hall filled with golden light, the smell of jasmine garlands, the sound of laughter echoing through the room. Daniel looked so happy, standing there beside Claire. His eyes sparkled the way they used to when he was a boy opening a birthday gift. As I watched them exchange vows, I felt a rush of pride and sadness all at once. Pride because my son had grown into a good man. Sadness because a part of me knew that his world was changing, and mine would never be quite the same. After the ceremony, I hugged him tightly. "Be good to her," I whispered. He smiled. "You don't have to tell me that, Mom." I smiled back, but I couldn't shake the small ache that sat quietly in my chest. In the first few months, everything seemed fine. Daniel and Claire visited often. On Sundays, they'd come for lunch and we'd eat together. My homemade curry, her salad, and Daniel's jokes tying it all together. Claire would help me set the table. "You make everything look so easy," she'd say, watching me cook. I'd laugh. "It's only easy after 20 years of practice." She was polite, soft-spoken, but there was always a kind of careful distance in her voice, as if she wasn't sure how close to step. I didn't mind. Love takes time, I told myself. But slowly the visits stopped being every week, then they became every month, then sometimes not at all. It began with little things most mothers wouldn't even notice at first. The calls that used to come every evening now came once or twice a week. "Mom, work's been crazy," he'd say, his voice quick, distracted. "That's good," I'd reply softly. "Busy is good." He'd pause for a second. "I'll come by soon, okay?" And I'd say, "Of course." But soon became a word that stretched too far. I started saving stories to tell him. When the neighbor's cat had kittens, when I planted new roses in the garden, when I fixed the leaky tap all by myself. I wrote it all down in a small notebook so I wouldn't forget when he finally called. But when he did call, the line was always filled with other things. Work deadlines, meetings, errands. I listened, smiling, but the space for my stories kept shrinking. Sometimes Claire would answer his phone. "Hi, Mrs. Patel. Daniel's just busy right now. I'll tell him you called." I'd thank her and hang up, trying to ignore the little sting those words left behind. I tried to visit them one afternoon. It was his birthday, and I wanted to surprise him. I baked his favorite cake and took the bus into the city just like before. When I reached, I hesitated at the door. I could hear laughter inside, friends, music, clinking glasses. For a moment I smiled, thinking how happy he must be. Then I knocked. Claire opened the door, her expression tightening slightly. "Oh, Mrs. Patel, you didn't say you were coming." "I wanted to surprise Daniel," I said softly, holding up the cake. She looked over her shoulder. "He's a little busy right now. We're having some friends over. Maybe next time." I nodded, pretending it didn't hurt. "Of course, dear. I'll just leave this here." As I turned to go, I heard Daniel's voice from inside, laughing, carefree. He didn't even know I was there. That night when I got home, I cut a small slice of the leftover cake and had it with tea. It tasted different, sweet, but heavy. The next few months passed quietly. I kept myself busy, joined a sewing circle, visited the temple more often, started helping my neighbor's children with homework. But no matter what I did, there was always a hollow space inside me, shaped like my son's voice. When he did visit, he was polite but distant, always checking his phone, always in a hurry. Once I asked, "How's work, Daniel?" He said, "Good, Mom, same old." I smiled. "And how's Claire?" He hesitated. "She's fine. Busy too." I tried to fill the silence with small talk, but the words just fell flat between us. One afternoon, Claire called. "Mrs. Patel, we've decided to move closer to Daniel's office. It'll make things easier." "That's wonderful," I said. "Let me know when I can come see the new place." There was a pause. "Yes, of course. Once everything's settled." "Of course," I repeated, knowing I probably wouldn't get that call. The house started feeling too quiet again. Sometimes I'd cook a big meal, forgetting it was just me. I'd set an extra plate by habit, then smile sadly and put it back. Every night I'd look at the photo of Daniel and me on the mantel. He was 10, missing a front tooth, his arm around my shoulders. I'd whisper, "Where are you, my boy?" Months passed before I heard from him again. He called one evening. "Mom, sorry I haven't been around. Things have been hectic." "It's all right," I said gently. "As long as you're eating properly." He chuckled. "Always worried about that, huh?" "Always," I said, trying to sound cheerful. Then before I could ask anything else, he said, "Listen, I'll call you soon, okay? Claire needs me." And the line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, the quiet filling the room. It's strange how silence can sound so loud when it comes from someone you love. A few weeks later, I got a letter from the electricity board. My bill had gone up unexpectedly. I smiled at the thought of how Daniel would have fixed it for me before. He was good with these things, so I called him. "Daniel, could you help me check this bill?" "Of course, Mom," he said. "But maybe you should just call the office. They'll handle it faster." "I will," I said softly. "I just thought you'd know." He hesitated. "Yeah. Sorry, I've got a meeting now. Love you, Mom." And just like that, he was gone again. I started realizing that life doesn't always break in big moments. Sometimes it breaks in tiny, invisible ways. The conversations that end too soon. The visits that get postponed. The warmth that slowly cools without anyone noticing. Every little thing I once took for granted. His laughter in the house, the sound of his footsteps, his half-eaten breakfast on the table, became memories instead of moments. And though I tried to be brave, every night when I turned off the lights, I'd whisper his name softly to the darkness, as if saying it could bring him closer somehow. Then one day, I saw something that made my heart ache in a way I hadn't felt before. I was at the market buying vegetables when I spotted him, across the street walking with Claire. He looked different. Taller somehow, sharper, like a man who belonged to a world I didn't recognize. I smiled instinctively, ready to call his name, but just as I took a step forward, I saw him look right at me, and then look away. He saw me. I know he did, but he kept walking, his arm around Claire, his eyes fixed ahead as if I were just another stranger on the street. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood there holding the shopping bag, my fingers trembling. The noise of the market faded away. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, loud and painful. I don't remember how I got home that day. I just remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he didn't really see me. Maybe he was distracted. I tried to convince myself of that. But deep down I knew. Something in our bond had changed. Quietly, invisibly, like a thread that had finally snapped after years of holding too much weight. That night, I took out the old photo album. Page after page of his childhood. His first birthday, his first day of school, his graduation. I touched each picture gently, tracing his smile with my fingertips. And then I whispered to myself, how do mothers let go of the children they raised with their whole heart? There was no answer, only silence. After that day at the market, something in me changed. I tried to pretend it hadn't happened, that maybe Daniel really hadn't seen me. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that look, the one that brushed past me as though I was invisible. I didn't tell anyone. Not my neighbor, not my sister, not even the kind lady at the temple who always asked about Daniel. I just said, "He's doing well," and smiled, the kind of smile you wear to stop questions from coming. But inside, my heart was tired. Weeks passed. Then one evening, as I was folding laundry, the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Hi, Mom," he said, sounding casual. My heart jumped. "Daniel! It's been so long. How are you?" "I'm fine," he said. "Listen, I need to tell you something." Something in his tone made me pause. "What is it, dear?" He cleared his throat. "Claire's parents are visiting this weekend, so maybe it's better if you don't come by for a while. They're a bit traditional, you know. They like things quiet." I felt my chest tighten. "Oh," I said softly. "Of course. I understand. It's just temporary," he added quickly. "Once they leave, we'll plan a proper dinner, okay?" "Of course, Daniel," I whispered. "Take care." And before I could say another word, he said, "Thanks, Mom. Love you," and hung up. I stood there holding the phone, the hum of silence wrapping around me like a cold wind. Not come by for a while, as if my presence was something to be managed, something to be hidden away. I sat down on the edge of my bed. And for the first time in years, I felt like I didn't belong in my own son's life. For days after that call, I tried to keep busy. I cleaned the house twice, even though it didn't need it. I rearranged the photo frames, dusted every corner, and cooked enough food for a family that no longer came home to eat. But every small sound, the ticking clock, the creak of the old chair, the soft hum of the refrigerator, reminded me of the silence Daniel had left behind. I used to think silence meant peace. But now I realize silence could be heavy too, heavy with all the words we never said. Then one morning I decided to call him anyway. Maybe I misunderstood, I thought. Maybe he didn't mean it like that. When he answered, I could hear movement in the background, voices, laughter. "Daniel?" I said softly. "Hey, Mom," he said quickly. "Can I call you later? We're just getting ready for something." I hesitated. "I just wanted to know if you're all right." "You sound busy," he sighed. "Yeah, Mom, things are just complicated right now. I'll come by soon, okay?" I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "All right, my son. I'll be here." And once again the line went silent before I could say anything more. That evening I sat by the window and watched the sunset turn the sky orange and pink. It used to be our favorite time of day. When he was little, Daniel would sit beside me watching the colors fade into night. "Mom," he once asked, "where does the sun go when it sets?" "To rest," I told him. "Even the brightest lights need rest." Now, watching that same sun sink behind the rooftops, I whispered, "Maybe that's what motherhood is too, shining until you disappear quietly." A few weeks later, the temple was holding a small community lunch. I was helping serve food when a friend asked, "Have you seen Daniel lately?" I smiled faintly. "Not for a while. He's busy with work." "Oh, I saw him the other day," she said casually. "At the mall. He looked happy. His wife is lovely." I nodded, forcing my smile to stay. "I'm glad." But when I got home, I sat on the bed and cried quietly. Not because he was happy, but because I wasn't part of that happiness anymore. Time has a strange way of dulling pain without ever removing it. You start learning how to live around the ache, like learning to walk with a limp. I told myself I was strong, that all mothers face this distance one day or another. But deep down I missed the small things. His phone calls, his laughter echoing down the hall, even his silly habit of leaving socks on the couch. Now the couch stayed neat. Too neat. One morning I received an envelope in the mail. It was an invitation. Daniel and Claire were hosting a dinner to celebrate their second anniversary. My heart fluttered. Maybe this was it. Maybe things were turning around. I ironed my best sari, cooked a small dish to bring along, and took the bus to their new apartment. When I reached, I could hear music and chatter from inside. I smiled, took a deep breath, and knocked gently. The door opened. Claire stood there, her smile polite but tight. "Oh, Mrs. Patel, you came?" "Yes," I said softly. "Daniel invited me." Her eyes flickered for a second. "Right, well, come in then." As I stepped inside, the room went quiet for a moment. I saw Claire's parents sitting at the table, her friends chatting in the corner, everyone dressed beautifully. Then Daniel appeared from the kitchen, holding a tray of glasses. When he saw me, he froze for just a moment. "Mom," he said finally, setting the tray down. "You made it." I smiled, relief washing through me. "Of course. I wouldn't miss it." He glanced toward Claire, who gave him a look I didn't understand. A small, uneasy frown. Dinner passed slowly. Everyone was kind, polite, but I could feel that something wasn't right. Every time I tried to talk to Daniel, someone interrupted. Every time I asked about his work, Claire would answer instead. At one point, I reached for his hand under the table. "You look tired, son. Are you eating well?" He smiled briefly, but his eyes avoided mine. "I'm fine, Mom." That brief moment, the way he looked at me, then looked away, told me everything. He wasn't comfortable. I was a guest in his home, not a mother at her son's table. After dinner, I stood to leave. Daniel walked me to the door. For a moment, I thought he'd hug me like he used to, but instead he just said, "Thanks for coming, Mom. I'll call you soon, okay?" "Of course," I whispered. "I'm proud of you, Daniel," he smiled. But it didn't reach his eyes. And as I stepped out into the night, the door closed softly behind me. That gentle sound felt louder than any goodbye I'd ever heard. A few days later, it happened. The moment that changed everything. I woke up one morning to a message from him. Just a short text. Mom, please don't come by unannounced anymore. Claire feels uncomfortable. We'll visit when we can. I read it twice, then 3 times. My hands trembled. It wasn't rude. It wasn't cruel. But it was cold. I stared at the words until they blurred through my tears. All I could think of was the little boy who used to hold my hand in crowded markets, afraid to lose me. Now he was the one walking away. That evening, I didn't cook dinner. I just sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd done his homework years ago. The same table where I'd bandaged his knee, where we'd shared birthday cakes and laughter. I whispered to the empty chair beside me, "You told me once you'd never forget me." The silence that followed was unbearable. Days turned into weeks. I didn't call him again. I didn't text. I wanted to so many times, but my heart had grown too tired of reaching out into silence. Instead, I started talking to him in my prayers. Every night before sleeping, I'd whisper, "Wherever you are, I hope you're happy. I hope someone reminds you to eat. I hope someone loves you enough to notice when you're tired. Because that's what mothers do. We keep loving, even when no one's listening." Then one afternoon, I was walking home from the store when I saw him again. Across the street. Same as before. He was on the phone, walking quickly, dressed in a suit. He looked like a man who belonged to the city, confident, busy, unreachable. I stood still, holding my bag of vegetables. For a second, I almost called out his name. But then I remembered the message. Please don't come by unannounced anymore. So instead, I just stood there quietly as he walked past me, his eyes fixed ahead, not once looking up. And that was the first time my son walked past me like a stranger. That evening stayed in my memory, like a mark on soft clay. The streetlight had flickered above me. The wind carried a faint smell of rain, and my heart felt heavier than the bags I was holding. I didn't cry then. Sometimes the pain grows so familiar that tears stop coming. You just walk home slowly, one step at a time, carrying what's left of your strength inside you. When I reached home, I put the vegetables away carefully, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that stretches too long. For years, that house had been filled with Daniel's voice, his laughter, his questions, his humming in the mornings. Now only the ticking clock kept me company, and yet in that stillness I realized something. I had spent all these years waiting for him to remember me, but I had forgotten to remember myself. The next morning I made a small decision. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic, just a quiet promise to live again. I joined a small reading group at the community center. I started walking every morning in the park, talking to other women my age. Some were widows, some were grandmothers, some were mothers like me, waiting for children who didn't call as often anymore. We shared stories, laughter, even tears. And I realized I wasn't alone. There were so many hearts out there, carrying the same kind of ache, the ache of being loved, but forgotten for a while. One morning, as I walked through the park, I saw a little boy trying to reach a kite caught in a tree. He looked frustrated, on the verge of crying. "Do you need help?" I asked. He nodded, his cheeks red with effort. I took the stick from his hand and gently lowered the string until the kite floated back down. He smiled at me, that same innocent, toothy smile Daniel once had. "Thank you, Auntie," he said, running off with his bright red kite. I stood there for a long time after he left, smiling to myself. Maybe love never really leaves us. It just changes shape, finding new places to rest. Weeks turned into months. I didn't hear from Daniel. But this time I didn't fill that silence with pain. I planted more flowers in the garden, marigolds, lilies, and a small tree by the fence. Every morning I'd water them and whisper small blessings into the soil. "Grow strong," I'd say softly. "Bloom even if no one is watching." And as the garden grew, so did I. Then one morning the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" I said. There was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in months, hesitant, quieter than I remembered. "Mom?" For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, my hands trembled slightly.
"Daniel?"
"Yes," he said. "It's me." There was another pause, a long one. Then he said, "I was driving past the old street today, and I saw the park, the one where you used to take me to feed the birds. I remembered you, Mom." I smiled softly, tears gathering in my eyes. You didn't forget me, I whispered. He sighed. I did, Mom, maybe not in my heart, but in my actions. I'm sorry. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. We all lose our way sometimes, Daniel. I understand. I want to visit, he said quickly. If that's all right. I smiled through my tears. My door was never closed, my son. That afternoon, I cooked his favorite dishes: lentil curry, rice, and the soft rotis he always loved. The smell filled the house the way it used to. When I heard the sound of a car stopping outside, my heart began to race. Then the doorbell. I opened the door slowly. There he was, standing on the porch, looking older, thinner, a little unsure. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he took a step forward and whispered, "Hi, Mom." And I smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because he was there. That's all I ever wanted to hear, I said softly. We sat at the table, the same table that had waited for him all these years. He looked around, his eyes lingering on the old family photos, the faded curtains, the small vase of fresh flowers. It hasn't changed, he said quietly. It has, I smiled, only slower than you. He looked down, guilt flickering in his eyes. I've been, I don't know, Mom, caught up in everything, work, life. I didn't mean to hurt you. I reached across the table and touched his hand gently. I know, Daniel. Life pulls us in different directions. I only wish you had told me sooner. He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. Claire, she didn't understand our bond. But things are different now. We've been talking. I think she wants to make things right too. I smiled faintly. It's never too late to make things right. For the first time in years, we ate together quietly. No big words, no long apologies. Just small moments, him asking for more rice, me reminding him to eat slowly. It felt like time had folded back on itself, bringing us to the simplicity of before. When he finished eating, he said softly, "You still remember all my favorites?" "Of course," I said. "A mother never forgets." As he got up to leave, he hesitated by the door. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I come by again next week?" I smiled. "You don't have to ask. Just come home." He hugged me then, a long, silent hug that carried years of distance, regret, and love all at once. And for the first time in a long time, I let the tears fall freely. After he left, I stood by the window watching his car disappear down the road. The evening light spilled gently across the garden, turning everything golden. It wasn't a perfect ending. He wouldn't suddenly visit every day. Life wouldn't go back to what it was before. But that didn't matter. He remembered me. He came back. And sometimes that's all a mother needs, not a promise, not an apology, but a moment of connection that says, "I still see you." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything that had happened, the silence, the hurt, the waiting, the slow forgiveness. And I realized something simple but true. Love doesn't disappear when people forget us. It waits quietly, like a light left on in a dark room, hoping they'll find their way back. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But either way, we keep that light burning because that's what mothers do. A week later, Daniel called again. "Mom," he said, "Claire wants to visit too. She said she's sorry for everything." I smiled softly. "Tell her I'll make her favorite tea." When they came, Claire hugged me at the door. Her eyes were red, her voice shaky. "I was young," she said quietly. "I didn't understand what I was taking from you." I held her hand gently. "You didn't take him. You just gave him someone else to love. And that's what I always prayed for." She cried then, quietly, sincerely, and I held her like I once held my son. In that moment, forgiveness wasn't something spoken. It was felt, between women who had both loved the same man, just in different ways. Now, years later, I sometimes sit in that same garden, the flowers blooming all around me. Daniel visits often. Claire, too. Sometimes they bring their little girl, who runs around the yard calling me Nani, and every time she laughs, I hear an echo of Daniel's childhood in her voice. It's as if life, in its quiet mercy, found a way to return what I thought I'd lost. When people ask me how I managed to forgive so much, I smile and say, because love never really leaves. It just finds new places to live. I don't tell them about the lonely nights, the unanswered calls, or the tears I hid behind a smile. Those were the chapters I had to walk through to reach this peace. And peace, I've learned, isn't the absence of pain. It's the acceptance that pain was part of the journey. When I look back now, the moment my son walked past me like a stranger doesn't hurt the same way anymore. Because I know it wasn't the end of our story. It was just a pause. A silence that taught us both how to listen again. So, to every mother who waits for a call that doesn't come, or a door that doesn't open, I want to tell you this: your love is not forgotten. It lives quietly in the hearts you've built, even when those hearts wander far away. Keep that light burning. One day they'll find their way home again.